Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to use a PC building simulator to build ourselves a PC, and I'm going to go through the steps of how you can build a PC, and it's really cool that we can do this in this virtual environment, and we're going to be able to actually show you up close and personal how you can build your own. So let's use PC building simulator and get right into this. And for those of you who want to practice building computers, this is a game that you can play on Steam, and it solely simulates building computers, and it shows all the different components and cases, and it helps you learn and get adequated. This is kind of a basic case here. This is by a brand called NZXT. This is kind of what you can expect when you're building a computer. Of course, the first thing you're going to want to do when you build is to take off the side panel so you can get access to the computer itself. So now that our side panel is off, we can actually see on the inside. Now, if this is the first time you're building a computer, you do have all these different trays here. So these are drive bays, and these drive bays down here, which are highlighted in green, that's where you're going to put your SSD, your hard drives, and you're going to be able to put all of your storage there. Now, some cases even have storage that's hidden underneath. Let's see if this one does. I think this one does have a little bit, but it's kind of tucked away. So we probably have to also take off the back panel to access that. Again, fortunately, we're able to show you how to do all of this, and I can give you a basic rundown. So what we're going to first do, now that we have our panel off, is we're going to take a look at motherboards. Now, motherboards are where all of your components plug into when you are building a computer. Here are just a wide example of what motherboards look like for computers. Some are smaller than the others. There are many different sizes to choose from, between mini ITX, micro ITX, and then of course you have normal ATX. Sorry, that's mini ITX, micro ATX, or normal ATX. And then there's server size computer motherboards, etc. Why don't we choose a ASRock 450 Steel Legend? This is going to be an socket AM4. So now what a socket means, a socket is where the CPU goes. This is your CPU socket. And the AM4 is the current version of the AMD Ryzen chipset. So we're going to actually just choose this one, the ASRock 450, and it should fit right in here. I'm not sure if we have to install what are called standoffs in this or not, or if they're pre-installed. But what you would essentially do, let's see, I think it'll do it for us, thankfully. What you essentially would do in this situation is you would put these standoffs in right here. So it's actually having us do that. Before you put your motherboard in, you're going to put these little things called standoffs. Now what they do is they stop the motherboard from making contact with the back panel and shorting out. You can see a side view here. There are the standoffs right there, and they're going to stop the motherboard from connecting the electrical signal between it and the case, because that would just complete the circuit and fry your motherboard, and you don't want that. So what we're going to do is we're going to put in our standoffs. Now this is just like if you were actually building a computer, you would just screw them right in. This is actually really nice because it's like, doing this the easy as butter way without having to struggle, because sometimes they can be a bit of a pain. So now we have our motherboard sitting on the standoffs. We have to put all of the screws in, and there's going to be screw holes above the standoffs where your motherboard is that line up with those standoffs that we just screwed in, and that's going to attach to your motherboard so that you can attach your motherboard directly to your case. So there you have it. Our motherboard is mounted. You can see the back, what is called an I/O here. So these are all different plugs. You have your HDMI, you have your display port. Those are two different display plugs. And then you have your USB plugs in the back. Of course, your sound, your microphone, and your Ethernet so you can access internet and your home network or your work network wherever you're building one of these. So whenever you install this motherboard, the panel is going to be right here in the back section. So now continuing on, what we're going to do is we're going to, you know what? I think I'm going to install the power supply because we are going to need one of those. So the power supply does what it says. It provides power to your whole computer. This is really what allows your computer to run. Without a power supply, you're not getting anywhere. And what you're going to want to do, as you can see here, is you're going to want to choose one that has wattage based off of what you're trying to achieve with your build. If it's like a hardcore video editing thing that's going to have a lot of stuff plugged into your computer and have a huge power draw, maybe you should go for like an 850 watt. They even go higher than that. We're going to go for this build with a, middle ground 750, and we're going to just put that puppy right in there. So sometimes you'll have to remove case parts. In this situation, it's having me remove the back. So removing the back of this case is going to let us install the power supply. So I'm going to choose it and we're going to slide it in. Most cases, your power supply will be able to slide right into whatever case you are using. So now we have our motherboard here. We've slid in our power supply, and we can go back to our PC parts that we have removed, and we can reattach this back part. And often you'll have little screws that go through the case and into your power supply so that your power supply is nice and secured to your case. So as you can see, it's flush against the back. This would be just like if you were building this at home. So we have our motherboard. We have our power supply, and as you can tell, there's the on-off switch for the power supply, and you have where you would put your power cable. Now, PSU does stand for power supply unit, so if you ever hear anyone refer to this as a PSU, that's what they're referring to. Okay, so the next step here that we're going to do is we are going to choose a central processing unit, which is kind of like, the little brain or heart of this whole thing. And it's going to go into this slot here, or as we mentioned before, the socket. Now we need an AM4 because that is the motherboard we chose. Your processor always has to match the socket that you chose. So I'm going to look for an AM4, and we have some here. Now there are different power as far as how good the processor is at computing. There are different amounts of cores. There are different power usage from them based off of how efficient they are, and based off of your task at hand. If you're a heavy gamer or you're just browsing the internet, is going to be what you are going to choose. So I'm going to choose, we have a little more power supply with a 750. So we're going to go with a 2700X AMD Ryzen 7. It is an AM4 socket, so we know it will work with our socket, and it has 8 cores. The more cores, the better. It's like having a bunch of engines, you have a lot that you can run, and you can run multiple things and not have to worry. So we're going to choose that, and we're going to install our CPU. Now with the AMD sockets, you do have to pull this little CPU handle before you can install it. And then you can put your CPU in. You just pull that handle down and it locks into place. So now we have our central processing unit right here. And we've pulled down our handle to firmly secure it into place. And when you go to put thermal paste onto this, thermal paste is what you put between this and what you will see that we will install called a heatsink that cools the central processing unit, because otherwise it will overheat. You will just put a little pea size right on top of that processor, and then when you put your heatsink on top of that, it'll evenly spread itself out. So that is very convenient way to do it. Super easy. But we're not going to do that step quite yet, because when you build a computer like this, as you can tell, you can start to run out of space. So if we were in there with our hands, things would get a little difficult for us. So instead, I'm going to put in some RAM, or random access memory. And your RAM is really important as it holds information and it loads textures if you're playing video games or you're rendering any movies that you might be editing or photos. RAM is very important, and the more the better as far as helping store those essential pieces of data. So I'm going to go ahead and look for some RAM, and you do have to make sure the RAM matches your motherboard. In this situation, I believe we have DDR4, it would be called. I'm not going to get too much into the information as to why it's called that, but we can choose some sticks of RAM. In this case, we have 8 gigabyte sticks, we have 16 gigabyte sticks. Why don't we go with some 16 gigabyte sticks? And then, so to put your RAM in, you'll always have these little tabs, and then you just kind of pull those tabs back, and then your RAM just slides right in there, and the tabs click into place when you put your RAM in there. And you can do that with every one. So let's get some more of that. And you're going to want to make sure that you match your memory. This will just make everything run that much better. I'm just going to pull these tabs open so we can put our last 2 sticks in there. All right, grab one more. I keep accidentally opening them. But yes, if this was real life, those would just click right into place. So we've got one more that we're going to put in there. Again, we're going to make sure that's open, grab that, and then we're going to slide that stick in there. Now it should be shut, and it is shut. So they are all clipped into place. As you can tell, the memory right here, that's what I'm highlighting right here, is all clicked into place in your motherboard, and you're good to move on to your next step. Now, there's a lot of different plugs that you plug in that go to your case, and that stuff is under what we call cabling. So you have this case plug here. Many of these will go if you have ports up here for USB on the front. Many of those will plug into your USB. Then you have these power plugs, and those actually come from your power supply unit down there. And then you have your graphics card. PCI Express is where you will often plug your graphics card. And then you have extra little PCI plugs right here for any peripherals, if you put a capture card in there, etc., etc. And then again, when you put a capture card or a graphics card in, sometimes it can take up a lot of space. So you might want to hold off till a little later before you do that, depending on what your build might actually be. Okay, so another thing about this power supply, I've taken off the back panel of the case so you can see this. Some power supplies, typically ones that are a little more expensive, will have what we call a modular design. Now, what this means is you can buy very specific cables dependent on your needs that will plug right into the power supply unit. Cheaper power supplies, or ones that you will typically see in most computers, do not have this modular design and actually have just a bunch of cables that are already affixed to the power supply, and you just kind of leave the ones you don't use in your case. So I've gone ahead and I've connected our motherboard modular cable here to the power port on the side of the motherboard right up front. So it goes from the power supply unit that's underneath there, comes to this little cable management port, and goes into the side of the motherboard, and that's going to power the motherboard, so the motherboard can send electrical signals to all the different components that plug into the motherboard. And then we can go ahead and connect up the other bits. So you're going to get your CPU cable, which is going to go from this section up here. And it's like this for a lot of motherboards. For this one, I've noticed you can look at your CPU and then kind of look to see the pins, the port for it right up in the corner. I've noticed a lot of them put it up in the corner, and that's going to go right to the motherboard section. So that's actually another motherboard plug. And it looks like those are the only two power spots that we need to worry about for this motherboard. So then from here, we can actually start to connect up our other things. Believe it or not, there isn't too much more you need to do besides the cabling for the case. So we can actually connect up those if we really wanted to. And you kind of match where they go. I'm not going to get into too much detail with that. What you will do is you will look up in your manual where your reset pin goes, where your power switch pin goes, where your USB pins go. But for the most part, the shapes will match up. So with those, all we really have to do is choose to plug them in. So all we have to do is choose what we need to plug in. I think we have, so we have that one plugged in. Our mouse and keyboard are still waiting. It looks like, do we need to get some more? Okay, so now, before you put on your heatsink, like I said, we're gonna put a little drop right in the middle there. So I've clicked there, it's applied the thermal paste. We have our drop of thermal paste there, and then we can find ourselves some sort of cooler for it. To the PC, it has tiny little screws at each end. So you're gonna wanna make sure you affix that. Now these AMDs have these back panels here where screws go in. So if you were building with an AMD, you're gonna wanna make sure that you get those all screwed in. And so now you have some way to dissipate that heat and keep your computer cool. Now we can get on to some more of the nitty gritty stuff. Often this fan also will have a cable that plugs into the computer so that your CPU fan can constantly keep your computer cool. So then next up, what we're going to want to do is you're going to want to install your graphics card to this computer. So you can find yourself some sort of graphics card. Now there are different strengths. I'm just going to choose an 8 gig RAM AMD because everything's AMD here. You're going to unscrew these back panels here, and then your graphics card is going to slide right into this slot right here. So in order to do that, if this was real life, we would have to choose the correct slot, make sure we get off the panels we need to get off. And then dependent, it looks like this one is actually the top two. So we removed the wrong one. All right, so now I can attach the graphics card. It's gonna slide right in to that slot right up there. As you can tell, it fits in right there, and usually it'll just snap into place. Then we can just install these little screws in the back, and it's supported in the back and it's plugged in. And then as you can tell, it needs some power cables right there. So a lot of the time, this will be the case where your graphics card is going to be powered. And most modern graphics cards are going to actually need this. So then you would just get your cables for your graphics card, and then you would just make sure that they are connected up. and then you go to the correct corresponding ports on your power supply unit. And that's going to power your graphics card in your PC. So now we have our processor that has its cooling unit on it. We have the power cables going in. We have our RAM, which we talked about, that holds that sort of cached memory inside of it so that it can help load things like textures, etc. We have our brains of our computer, our processor, which is being cooled by the one single dot of thermal paste, and that's that cooling solution. We have our heat sink on top that has a fan. Now the heat sink, of course, is what helps dissipate that heat from the central processing unit. We have our motherboard that's attached to the case with the I/O back here that has USB, display, etc. And of course, we have our power supply unit and all of that stuff. And then you have your extra cables and stuff like that. So basically from here, what you would do with the rest of this, and let's see how easy they actually make it for us, is you would want to plug in all of the little I/O down here and things like that. Of course, you would want to get some sort of hard drive. And the hard drive is going to be where you're going to store your data. So I'm just going to grab a small one. This is an SSD. They're nice because they're small. And then with the SSD, all you really have to do is attach a SATA cable from that to your motherboard. And then you're going to attach a power cable from your power supply to the SSD so that it also gets power. So with that, all you would do is you would go grab your cables for that, and you would make sure it gets connected up to your power supply, as we mentioned, and you would make sure it gets connected up to your PC. And this PC case, again, has a lot of cable management, so everything dips down and goes up into it. So from there, you'd be able to put your Windows, you'd be able to put your games, your software, and it is helpful to have more than one of these, so we could install another one right there. But for the sake of this video, we're not going to worry too much about that. So now we need to connect that air cooler, as I mentioned earlier. It does have that pin, so I'm going to plug it in right there, and it's connected. Okay, so now we have the fans connected. Now the fans will connect directly to most motherboards as long as they have the ports to do so. Now I do want to wrap this all up by saying some of the extra stuff you will have to do to complete this build. If it was a real computer in front of us, you've pretty much got everything you need. However, these ports down here, like I mentioned before, you'll have to put your reset switch, etc. on those. If you have more USB ports, they will plug into those spots, etc., etc. If you had like some sort of SD card reader up front, all those different I/O ports will plug into down here. Now, this motherboard has a lot extra options for those things, so it really depends what you're plugging into the motherboard. You can, of course, add more things on the back as well, like different capture cards or different sort of accessories like cards that have more USB ports, what we call RAID cards that let you attach a ton of drives and get really crazy and techy and IT with it. It's really cool. But for the most part, this is your central computer build. All you would have to do now is plug in your monitor to the back. Again, you have your HDMI or your display port. So depending on what monitor you're using is what you're going to choose there. You'd plug in your mouse to the back, your keyboard to the back. And let's see, anything else you might have. Flash drives, external hard drives if you have them. And of course, you would put your Ethernet cable back here so you can connect to the network. Plug in your speakers or your headphones to the back here. And if you were connecting to a monitor, you have the graphics card to plug the graphics card to a monitor. So this is pretty much everything. This wraps up how to build a computer. It's pretty exciting, And I hope, I know this is kind of virtual and digital, but I hope it gives you some sort of sense of how you're supposed to assemble all of this. And the most important thing here is to make sure you're keeping your insides of your computer cool, and just make sure it doesn't overheat. When you're building this, make sure you sort of touch the sides of the case to ground yourself, because static electricity can actually damage your motherboard and components. So don't be doing this with your socks rubbing against the carpet. You can buy bracelets that actually clip your wrist with a little thing to the side and keep you grounded for the entirety of it. Those are really nice. Those are anti-static bracelets. But yes, this is pretty much everything. So I hope you've learned something in this program. And this has been Sam from the Antioch Public Library District with a little computer building. I might have missed a few things in there, so if you have any questions, feel free to ask. The biggest thing is if it doesn't turn on, it doesn't post, then you know that you need to go reevaluate all the things you did. And sometimes it can take a while, sometimes you'll find it right away. Again, you will need to load Windows onto your hard drive too. That's just a whole lot more advanced stuff. Here you go. We built a computer digitally, virtually, on a computer that I'm recording this. So cool. All right. I'll see you later.